Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress. This is the monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bay 12 forums. These Q&As cover all things related to Dwarf Fortress, and this time we have a bonus. Because on the 31st of March, Tarn Adams left a really big blog post available for anybody to read. It's an update on Magic. But before I read that, I would just like to remind everybody that if you would like to take part in the Bay 12 Games Future of the Fortress questions and answers, you can do so by signing up for a Bay 12 Games forum account. I will link to all of the threads in the description of this video. But without any further delay, let's read this blog post about Magic written by Tarn Adams himself. Hello. Since the last patch, things have been afoot in Magicville. I spent some time on magical populations of people, and infrastructure we need for that. For instance, a world can have an earlier civilization, where everybody can have links to one of the procedurally generated magic forces, and use effects more freely than the lab-using wizards of the Fort Mode era. That sort of thing is in now, with the relevant objects generated by Lua, but available in regular interaction TXT files. The next chunk of time I spent working on the labs, since Jacob provided over 300 images of lab bits for me to use. The game can now construct images of workshops supporting a variety of different vibes, from botany to rune carving to orbs and mirrors, to necromancy to brewing and alchemy, to scrolls and books to lightning. We've kept them the standard 3x3 tile size to make it all manageable, but there are some animations for mechanisms, electricity, candle flames, etc. It's pretty wholesome. I'm going to switch gears now for the next routine patch, for sometime mid-April-ish. So far, it seems that the magic work and routine patches will coexist nicely, which is good, if I can keep up a monthly patch cycle while making progress on the Magic, Army, and Diplomacy release. That should be good enough. So before I dive into the Future of the Fortress here, I just wanted to unpack a few things here. This is a progress update on what Tarn has been working on over the past few months, at least since he finished patching the Siege update. There's a few really big takeaways here. The first of these is that all of the effects that the lab-using wizards can have is generated by Lua, and available in regular interaction TXT files. This means it'll all be moddable, so if you don't like the flavor of vanilla magic, you'll be able to mod it into whatever you want it to be. I see this as being a really powerful and also rather understated portion of this blog post. I also think that the early civilization stuff is really exciting because it links back to stuff that I talked about in my recent video talking about myths and magic, as in the early myths generator. Everything else just seems like candy. All of the workshops and minor animations for the workshops just seems like flavor for the most part. I assume that will all link to the relative effects that they are being used for, but I don't know how much control we're going to have over that in game. It's going to be exciting to see, and I'm curious to see exactly what these spells, if you want to call them that, will look like while gameplay is running. It's exciting and a bit unnerving, to be honest. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section. But with all of that aside, let's dive in to the Bay 12 Games report for April 1st, 2026. Toady writes, "Things are going well over here. As stated in the recent devlog, we have the graphics up for the Magical Research Labs that'll be in Fort Mode. We've also been working on the Era mode that occurs before the regular world gen now, where some thousands of years pass and civilizations can be more reliably destroyed for later, digging up by yourselves. The Magical Ruins, Finders. We sold 6,500 copies in March. Things seem pretty slow, but that's the way of things. All will be well." Thank you, Tarn. And with that, we dive into the Future of the Fortress. The first question comes in from Dick Butt DeGreat, and they write, "What? You serious, Big T? You mean like this year? This year? This year?" As in the year of magic. Followed up by a response from DPH Kraken, which Toady quotes, and I'll read it first. "The big wait is dead. I've been saying that Lua is one of the biggest tangible steps towards magic. To this, I agree." And Toady writes, "Yeah, we're aiming to get the first new magic stuff out this year." The second question comes in from Catman3, and they write, "Will the Myths and Magic update come alongside any updates to books and scrolls? And by extension, will there be any fixes to the book binding? More specifically, the notorious bug where books magically become one page after they're quite as binded." And Tarn writes, "There are going to be changes in that neighborhood, so it's more likely than normal anyway." A question from Orkius, and they say, "Would it be possible in the future to be able to enact specific policies in your fortress that would allow you to encourage trying to get animal people and other creatures not a part of a major civilization to join your fortress as citizens. If possible, would you be able to convert captured intelligent creatures to your civilization? Either savage animal people from the caverns, captured intelligent invaders like goblins, and a bit like how you can do so with captives in RimWorld. I know you can begin a world where goblins have already been introduced into good civilizations. It would be interesting if you could start a world and be the one to initiate that change in the world, and see how it affects things later, should you hop into Legends mode. And Tarn's response is, I guess you can do that now with bards and other travelers as well. I'm not sure which policies you had in mind, and if they'd fit in. We've been orbiting doing things with captives for a long while, and it missed the cut during the siege update. It's still there in the pile. The next question comes in from Drakli, and they say, with the magic updates coming, are necromancers changing as well? As it stands, fort-dwelling necromancers seem highly self-destructive, responding to danger by summoning nightmares and boogeymen, and immediately turn on and murder them. Comparatively, necromancers in towers seem to last a while, building their influence and power base without imploding. Might fort necromancers become more viable as other types of magic users to get added to the game? And Tarn's response is, magic user behavior in general is going to be a central part of the release. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of the stupidest fort behaviors get looked at, even if evil changed by knowledge necromancers as they currently exist specifically don't get any higher on the list of proper citizen candidates. Part of the overall magic goals are to make your fort and other civs recognize the most dangerous magic users as a danger, which doesn't really happen now, aside from the not aging as scary mechanic in World Gen. The next one is a two-parter from Shirakage, so I will read them in two parts. Now that we are getting close to the first example of real magic, I wanted to ask some future questions related to magic in the game world. Would a partial transformation magic be possible, like transforming only your hand into a creature you killed, or you choose from a category of things and temporal wings and cheetah legs to run faster, etc.? And Tarn quotes DPH Kraken on this one, so I will read their response first. They write, partial transformations are one of the more difficult questions that's come up in regarding magic, and they're grouped under the centaur problem. It's a pretty broad scope that includes a hybrid creatures like half-elves and centaurs alike, and Frankenstein experimentation. There's definitely a solution, it's just not one that's made it to a release. And Tarn's response is, yeah, as DPH Kraken says, partial body transformation problems are among the harder ones. And we're likely not going to attempt to bite that off this time in order to keep this release manageable. But it has come up a lot, and we'd like to tackle it at some point. The second question from Shirakage is as follows. In the future, with the Myth Generator, we will have proc-gen creatures and entities, but what about the animals? Will the generator create animals with magic too? For example, a cow that randomly makes itself invisible, or a rabbit that creates explosions upon jumping or landing after jumping. It could certainly make the world more interesting, but also maybe it's hard to implement in the game. And Tarn's response is, it's not too difficult, really, to apply a magical effect to animal populations. It already happens in some way in the evil environments with undead animals. It's certainly on the table, broadly, for magical regions. We've already updated civilization populations to have broader access to magic knowledge for some of the stuff we're doing in early World Gen. The next question comes in from a Spatula66, and it seems to be a sneaky four-parter, so I will read it in four parts. They write, some questions regarding the upcoming underground map rewrite stuff. Will we be able to have custom user-defined biomes underground? User-defined biomes in general are something I'd really like to see, though I can definitely see why they'd be troublesome to implement. Would it be easier to first implement them underground compared to on the surface? And Tarn's response is, regarding surface versus underground user biomes. They both have their challenges. With the surface, it's making it play nice with the existing fields, temperature, rainfall, etc., and existing animal population distributions, which isn't a huge problem, but can be annoying. With the underground, it's the general brittleness of the code, which is precipitating the whole rewrite to begin with. Depending on what you mean by user-defined, I don't think any of it is a huge problem, once the basic hard issues of the map rewrite are dealt with. The next part of this seeming four-parter from Spatula is as follows. How much will we be able to customize the layout of caverns in general? Will it be possible to have caves that stretch significantly deeper than 3 layers? And Tarn's response is, part of the plan is to junk the 3-layer setup entirely. There would still be the possibility of large horizontal layers, which are convenient because they are more likely to be found by the player, which is a very important concern. But even those would be defined in terms of more controllable full 3D connections among regular solids. This is very, very subject to change since I'm not in that release. But the vague idea currently is to define everything in terms of rectangular solid connections with additional meta structures as necessary, to lighten the load and allow some oddities and simulated curvature at the higher levels. But right now, I'm fully locked into the 3 layers plus magma plus underworld with overwrought special features and very clunky underground site maps. The third question from Spatula: how much of a focus will there be on making the underground more interesting to explore in adventure mode? It's really hard to travel or do anything underground right now. There's not really anything of interest down there anyways. I think exploring the underground in adventure mode could be very fun and interesting though, if it was more diverse and more navigatable. And Tarn's response is, this would also solve the adventure mode problem since the higher meta layers would allow for more general travel, as with the tunnels when they aren't broken, which was never, and also much better exploration, all for free, basically once it is working. And Spatula wonders, will you be changing the way underground plants and grasses work so that they don't spread into other cave biomes? Right now, after some time, with multiple layers open, they kind of become a scrambled mess of different plants, which looks really bad. I quite like how each layer looks initially before plants start spreading everywhere, and it's a shame that it doesn't last. And Tarn's response is, I suspect the grasses would also become controlled, as underground biome definitions are formalized, though it would have to be done explicitly, which I should do. And the last of these questions from Spatula: speaking of which, I think something needs to be done on how overgrown the vegetation gets after a few years in Fortress mode. After enough time, nearly every tile will have some kind of shrub or tree in it. It's especially a problem in the caves where the plants are seasonal, and so everything becomes crowded with dead plants quickly. I feel the vegetation density should try to remain close to how it starts, as it doesn't make much sense for everything to inexplicably start growing so much denser once you settle on a spot. But perhaps this isn't so relevant to the current focus of development. And Tarn's response is, there was a CPU issue at first with tracking vegetation density on regrow, so I set it aside, but I agree, it should be addressed. The next is a 3-parter from Beeg, and they say, how are human civs' internal site relationships with each other structured currently? Is it just a loose confederation of site-level loads? And Tarn's response is, there's also the Overlord level that sits about the hearths and lives in one of the market towns. But yeah, there aren't any intermediate structures yet. Even the other large market towns are just regular hearth. Beeg's second question is, are there any plans to add variety to the government type used by civilizations such as feudalism, i.e. vassal relationships? And Tarn's response is, yeah, for sure. That's a central element of the entity rewrite that we talk about from time to time. That rewrite is no longer a thing as far as one giant release, but those elements are going to start coming up more and more as diplomacy gets worked on. And the last of 3 parts, from Beeg, when adventurer site creation is re-added, would it be in the cards for adventurer lords and ladies to have diplomatic relations with other sites, such as alliances? And Tarn's response is, once we have the actual levers you can pull. Yeah, right now there isn't much to do. After diplomacy gets worked on, then these actions will exist, and we'll be able to let adventurers do them when they hold these roles, which will be pretty cool. It all went sideways when we set down villains as the Steam work began. But we want you to be able to do the normal diplomacy things, and also be able to run an organization using the existing and future plots as well, for whatever purpose. Next is a question from Catman3, and they say, among Three Toes' stories is one in particular that strongly stood out to me. Snatcher, from back in 2010, tells the story of an elven princess who was half-goblin, and delves into a variety of interesting branching concepts. That said, has the addition of such cross-species of the main races been considered? As you have already mentioned, there's nothing stopping you, or really anyone, from adding new main races to the Raws, but is something like introducing a half-species possible? Not really relevant to the game itself, but I also have to ask, is there any particular reason Three Toes stopped writing these stories? Any chance he might start writing again? And Tarn's response is, as above with the cheetah thing, there's the whole centaur problem, which we have not yet tackled. and cross-species stuff is in the same bucket. It's required to do at some point, since it's a staple of fantasy, but it's difficult to do with the materials and body information we have. With the stories, there isn't a particular reason. The hiatus started around the time the villains and then Steam stuff picked up, and a lot was going on then. It since hasn't come back around, but may yet. Another question from Dick Butt the Great, and they say, with Myth and Magic now in the old pipeline, I was hoping that you might want to clarify some stuff about the less inherently fun aspects of getting to cast magic, specifically with respect to interaction costs. I've heard you mention in interviews about stuff concerning temple magic, as it pertains to fort mode, as an upcoming feature, and how this'll invoke the laboratory zones, which will designate and assign dwarves to, similar to libraries and stuff, with spheres and counter magic, and likely some inevitable form of madness. However, my impression is that this will be very much its own unique sort of thing, and won't likely tie into current systems that we use currently too much. So like standard unit-controlled interactions. But perhaps I'm mistaken. And an adventure mode level focus with respect to individual unit-controlled interactions, are there still plans to diversify the costs of interaction usage in the systems we use currently? Don't get me wrong, cooldown timers were a sensible catch-all stand-in back in 2012, or whatever it was, but it has gotten a little stale. And so, from my impressions, I'm fuzzy on if you're planning on tossing us a completely new form of semi-edible content to chew on, which may just as easily chew on us. Or if you're planning to hook us up with improved versions of prior existing features, such as a range of available interaction effects and different costs casting blood magic by spending blood to use an interaction, or casting via stamina exertion and spending unit stamina to use an interaction. Or is this the plan to renovate the whole basement? And Tarn's response is, the laboratory locations and etc., with their spheres and counter magic and research, etc., will be tied directly to the interaction system. It's all still being baked, but right now this seems like this will include rituals, as well as prepaid cost for some interactions or other spell effects that don't go so far as requiring a ritual will usually still require some new cost. I've currently got a version of the Force Link/Unlink stuff going from the MythGen demo, as a prereq for using other interactions. This is all with additions to the current interaction raw format. Lua is used to generate the raws, but regular raws are still processed, and can be made without Lua. There's a future plan to allow interaction effects themselves to go back and use Lua scripts, to really expand the logical possibilities. But that'll take more work, that we don't have time for this time, since our Lua isn't currently hooked up to make fast queries about environmental combat situations, etc. So there will be lots of new ways to do costs, but old interactions as they stand should still work pretty much. And you'd probably want to add new costs to any you've made so that they aren't all freely castable. And we're using Lua this time to generate magic systems and their peripherals, rather than trying to hook it up for live effects. Next up, we have another question from a Spatula, and they say, could we have the ability to shorter adventure mode syndromes? The healing potions we currently have feel like they were intended to last a much shorter amount of time than 1,728 or so ticks. Interaction cooldowns are also set to be 10 times shorter in adventure mode for some reason, which is also something I think we should be able to customize. And Tarn's response is, this could come up. I've already added some additional tags to allow syndromes that can last without active effects, as well as effects to remove syndromes by class, for some state bookkeeping, which has been useful. The changes will continue. The next question, and last question, comes from Aztecs, and they write, are there any plans for Legends mode to get its own loading screen or menu artwork? And Tarn's response is, we're still missing some of the basic things like maps that existed in the pre-Steam version. Legends mode certainly deserves to look cool and have its own loading art. Thank you for the replies, Tarn. All in all, I think this is a very exciting time for Dwarf Fortress. If you haven't watched it yet, I do recommend you watch my video on Myths and Magic, which I will link in the pinned comment of this video. I personally think that there's some really interesting things happening here. This is one of the most exciting periods of Dwarf Fortress that I've seen since the Steam version itself was announced. There's a lot of chatter and speculation, and we don't really know what things are going to look like yet, but it's still exciting nonetheless. But in regards to videos, I'd be curious to know, would any of you be interested in a video similar to the one I did on Myths and Magic, but relating specifically to villains? I feel like talking about that system as a whole would also be interesting, because it was something that was very actively in development and the primary focus up until the beginning of the development of the Steam version, where it has been put aside and still hasn't really been touched. Is that something that would be interesting to you guys? And alongside of that, are there any other mechanics in Dwarf Fortress that you guys would like a history lesson on? I'd be curious if videos like that would be interesting to you in the future. All in all, I just want to say a real quick thank you to my editor for putting these videos together, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next month for another Future of the Fortress, whenever Tarn posts it.